Hello, Andrew yet again, and this is episode 162. And today we are looking at the Pharisees again, this time having another go at Jesus. We're into Holy Week, he's in the temple. He is under attack by the religious leaders. They're both trying to find a kind of chink in his armour, a place of accusation for him. And so here we have the Pharisees coming back for another go. Now this is Matthew 22, verses 34 through to 40. When the Pharisees heard that he, Jesus, had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. "Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest?" He said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbour as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." This is brilliant. It really is. He's kind of covered everything in just a most amazing way as he's brought two disparate things together from two different parts of the Old Testament and combined them into an integrated, life-giving, way of living and engaging with life and with God and with the world. You see, there's nothing in the Ten Commandments about loving God or loving neighbour. The Ten Commandments, and you can have a look at them, I'll give you the reference in a minute, it's actually Exodus 20. It's about how you won't behave negatively toward them. It's the things you will not do. You will not do these things. It's about behaviour. It's not about what you do, it's about what you won't do. And it's not about what's in the heart, it's about simply obeying a set of rules, of laws, of instructions. But what Jesus does here is he turns this around. He kind of takes, well, what's underneath this? What is it that is really required for the essence of it to be understood and to be lived out? And is recognizing that it's something that ultimately starts and comes from the heart. And so this is where Jesus cast it as what we will do. Well, these things start in the heart. And it may start simply first as choices that we make. Love is not just a feeling. It starts with a choice. We make a choice to love. We make a choice to invest ourselves in seeking good for others. Eventually, the feelings are likely to follow the choices that we've made. So here they are, and these two commandments are rooted both in the Old Testament, both in the law. The first part is, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. This comes from a little passage known as the Shema. It's one of the great liturgical calls to Israel. And Shema means hear. Hear, O Israel. This is Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. And then the next verse, he says, this is Moses, these commandments that I give you today are to be upon your hearts. So this is the first part that Jesus picks up from Deuteronomy chapter 6, the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord, you are to love the Lord your God. And this starts in your heart. It's not just about a set of rules that you doggedly and slavishly obey. This is something that is invited to come from the heart. And the second part is to love your neighbour as yourself. Now we find the reference to this tucked right at the end of a reasonably long section in Leviticus chapter 19. And if you start reading through from verse 1, you'll get up to verse 18, it is, right at verse 18, and you'll read this. This is verse 17. Do not hate your brother in your heart. Rebuke your neighbour frankly, so you will not share in his guilt. Do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against one of your people, but love your neighbour as yourself. I am the Lord. Love your neighbour as yourself. I am the Lord. Now this whole section, right through to verse 18, has been a series of instructions about we're to look after our neighbours, particularly the poor and the disadvantaged. Things like making sure that you don't harvest to the edge of the field. Make sure that you don't pick up the grapes that you drop. Make sure that you don't come afterwards and pick up your gleanings. They're all to be left for the poor. And so there's a whole series of instructions in the first part of this chapter, right up through to verse 17 and the first part of verse 18, on how you're to treat other people. And it finishes with these words: love your neighbour as yourself. I am the Lord. And it's like drawing a line under it. This is kind of summing the whole up. There it is. All this bit that you've got, then it goes on to talk about mixing seed in fields and wearing garments with different fabrics and all sorts of things like that. So this is the part that we've just read, where it's all kind of summarized in this one expression: love your neighbour as yourself. I just encourage you, actually, if it's worth doing, just to sit for a few moments. I would even just stop the video right here and go to Deuteronomy chapter 20, the 10 Commandments, and sit with it. Just read through them. Recognize the difference between that and Leviticus chapter 19 verse 18, which we've just read, and Deuteronomy chapter 6 verse 4. So just note them down. Deuteronomy 20, the 10 Commandments. Leviticus 19 verse 18, which gives that little summary about loving your neighbour. Just look at what comes before and see how it finishes. And Deuteronomy 6 plus 6 verse 4, the Shema: hear, O Israel. And I'm confident that you'll notice that there's a difference, and it's a kind of hard difference. You see, the thing for me, and you'll see it reflected in the title of this message, a centre that will hold. I've been looking for and believe I've found a centre that I can base my life around. Now, I think you probably will have picked this up, at least one other, if you've been watching the whole series, where I've talked about this before, but it bears repeating. We all need a centre that we can hold, a centre that we know holds firm. And I want to suggest that it's also kind of important that the centre is one that potentially we could all agree on, one that will work for everyone, all 9 billion of us. And I believe we have it here. For the Jewish people, the centre would likely have been in obeying the commandments, the laws, the regulations of the Torah, all of the minutiae of the law. That's what they had to do to secure God's favour, to know that they were going to be okay. For Christians, the centre, certainly in the evangelical part of the church, which is the church that has given birth and nurtured me, and with which I still identify, is the centre is usually about believing the right things. Things that we describe as truth. We'll say, actually, truth is the centre. And we give assent to a set of propositions and believe that as a result of believing those propositions that we are safe. This is the centre of what we have to believe in order to know that we're saved. Part of the difficulty with both these approaches of obeying all these laws and on holding to truth is that they are not universally agreed to. Indeed, they cannot be. Because in terms of the Jewish law, it's impossible to keep. That's part of the point of it. It points to the holiness of God and shows the great gulf that exists between us that only the grace of God, the generosity of God, can bridge. And the commitment to truth is highly problematic. Who decides? Who's the arbiter? Many are committed to this path, and I was one of them for decades. And they'll tell you that we will tell you that you simply need to stick to the pure Word of God. The problem is that we cannot agree what it actually means. And we rip one another apart over what to the outside world would seem like the smallest of differences. I'm also aware that I've been one who has intentionally followed the way of Jesus for the best part of 50 years. And I've changed my mind about a lot of things during those times. Things that I was sure were the actual core central truths. And discovered other things that I find that are of carrying more weight. I find that really interesting. And so we'll never agree. We'll never agree. You just look at the Christian church. You've just got to Google just about anything and find the way the church rips itself apart because we cannot agree on what the central tenets of the faith actually need to be. And we'll rip one another over the smallest thing and condemn one another to hell. I've seen people condemn others to hell because they believe that it was okay for women to teach. That person's on their way to hell. Seriously? Because of that? Same. We won't agree. And Islam has a similar problem, and it's caught with the tensions of both the Jewish and the Christian worlds. Well, that's just my problem, so it's even worse for them. What Jesus we see here doing, though, is charting a new course. Jesus is telling us that the centre that will hold is love. Loving God and loving our neighbour. John picks us up the same theme in his Gospel, but more particularly in the first of his 3 little letters in the end of the New Testament. If you spent the rest of your life simply sitting with 1 John 4, I want to suggest it's probably all you need. It's all you need. 1 John 4. And maybe it is summed up best in it's actually got a huge amount in it, but it's not a long chapter, it's got a huge amount of richness in it. God is love. Whoever lives in love lives in God, and God in them. That's it. That's it. Loving others actually in the end demonstrates our love for God. A little later on he says, how can we say that we love God whom we have not seen if we do not love our brothers or sisters whom we have seen? We demonstrate our love for God by the way in which we love those around us. And here's the thing. 9 billion people, I would suggest, for the most part, with a few perhaps ornery exceptions, would agree on what true love looks like, what real love looks like. I had this conversation with a friend and colleague, and he says, we would never agree on the definition of love. And I said, well, I'd start with the, he's a much better scholar than me, I would start with the New Testament definition of agape. And he says, yeah. And he says, well, how would you define it? I says, that which seeks the highest and best good of the other. And he looked at me and he said, that's a good definition. I says, yeah. And I said, so we're agreed about that? And he says, yeah, we agreed that that was a good definition. That which seeks the highest and best good for the other. That is the agape love that Jesus demonstrates and talks about in the New Testament. That kind of self-giving, generous, abundant desire to bless and to see others prosper and grow. As Paul says a couple of times, he says, love builds up. It does. It makes us expand. And we all know it. We can all recognize it when we see it. When we see the genuine article, we all know there's something deep within us that sees that kind of love. It's a centre that'll hold. And Jesus says, all this will hang on this, hang all the law and the prophets. Effectively, he's saying, you just do this. You love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbour and yourself, and you can let go of all the rest. If that's all you do, that's all you need to do. You can let go of all the rest. And this is a centre, as I said, that will hold for Jews, for Christians, for Muslims, for everybody. It reflects the very nature of God, and it gives life to both the loved and the lover. This is a centre they can hold. Obviously somebody's come to the door. Jesus' whole life is lived out of this principle, and he ultimately gives his life to demonstrate his commitment to it. I'm not saved because I believe the right things. I'm not saved because a tight set of commandments. Bailey, that'll do. Excuse me just a moment. Right, well, Uber Eats just came to the door, looking for one of our neighbours, so we'll just finish this off again. We'll just backtrack a little. So this idea of loving God and loving our neighbours as ourselves is a centre that can hold. And Jesus lives his whole life out of this principle. And he ultimately gives his life to demonstrate his commitment to it. I'm not saved because I believe the right things. I'm not saved because I obey a tight set of commandments, laws and regulations. I'm saved and safe, eternally secure, because I'm loved by God. And God has demonstrated this in the life, death, resurrection and ascension of Jesus. And he invites me to join in the loving project with him. And you too. God bless you.